Hi, in this Spring Boot tutorial, we're going to create some validation rules. So we're going to try out this application here where we have a login screen. And when I try to click login, you can see that validation rules tell us that we have a password issue. If I try to make a short username, I also get an error there. So we're going to go through the code and install some libraries to make this Spring Boot application include validation. My name is Shad Sluiter, and I'm a professor of computer science and software development at Grand Canyon University. This course that you're looking at is a Java Spring Boot application development course. We're building web apps in Java. You can see an index of the things that we're learning in this course, so make sure that you subscribe so that you come back to get the rest of the lessons. So at this point, we're working on validation rules. So in this example, we're going to validate that a certain length is used for a username and password. Let's get to the code right now. So I'm going to launch the app and choose a workspace location, and then we're going to create a new project. So in our application here at Spring Tools Suite, we go to File, New, Spring Project, Spring Starter Project. Then for the project, we're going to call this thing Topic 2-2, and I'm going to leave all the settings that we did on previous tutorials. So I'm targeting Java 11 as the minimum that we can run this on. We're going to give a domain name as com.shadsluiter. If you want to use your own name, that's great. Now let's go ahead and choose Next. So for the dependencies, I think on all the tutorials in Spring Boot, I'm choosing the same three starter projects. So we choose the developer tools, we use Timeleaf, and then we also use Spring Web. And so these are the standard dependencies that we're going to use. Go ahead and choose Finish and let the program build the first version of your app. So now I'm going to create two new packages in this project. The first package we're going to name controllers. So make sure that you put in com_yourname.controllers. And then for the next package, we're going to call it com_shadsluiter.models. So we're going to have a login model stored here. So a controller plus a model. Now the login model is just a class. So let's go to the new package that we just created, right click on it, and choose New Class. We'll call this thing Login Model. Now, for this class, we're only going to have two properties. We're going to accept a username, and we're going to accept a password. Now, later on in our project, we will probably create a user model, which will be different than the login model. The user model can include things like the first name, the last name, the address, the zip code, all of the things that you would contain for a user. But for this particular model, it is going to be precisely matched with a form that accepts only two pieces of data, the login username and the login password. And so that's why we create this special class. It's for a special form. Next, we're going to create all of the getters and setters. We're going to create a constructor, and we're going to create the toString. So right-click somewhere in the code and choose Source. Look for Generate Getters and Setters. Select both properties, or all the properties you might say, and choose Generate. Then we're going to repeat this. So right-click, choose Generate from Source again, and this time we're generating a constructor using the fields. So we'll create a constructor that has two inputs. Next, I want to create a constructor that has no inputs. So this is the default empty constructor. We're going to create some empty class instances of this thing. Then finally, we're going to create a toString method. So we might need this for testing purposes. So let's do a source, generate a toString method, and use the two properties. So we've got ourselves the standard kind of a class that has two properties, getters and setters, and a toString method with a constructor. We're ready to move on. Now we'll switch over into the controllers package. Let's right-click there and choose a new class. For this class, let's call it the login controller. So this will handle the input form and we'll check to see if the login is valid. Now the first thing you have to do when you create a controller is to give an annotation at the very top. So right above the class name, put in the word @controller. And this will be imported, of course, from the Spring Boot libraries. Then we're going to define what the default pathway is for this controller to handle any events. So we'll say request mapping. Notice we have an R and an M that are both capitalized. Then inside of the parentheses of this annotation, we tell the URL extension that will be handled by this controller. And login seems to make sense to me. So anything that goes to /login will be handled by an event somewhere in this controller. Now we're going to create a method that will show the login form. So let's create a public with a return string, and let's name the event something like display login form. Now the default usually is to include a model along with the event as a parameter. So we'll call this thing a model. Now we're going to have to tell it to do a get mapping so we know what the URL is. So I'll do a get mapping with a single slash character. So the login will actually, the URL will be login slash. That's the combination of the request mapping at the top along with this slash here. Now we're going to return something, right? We're going to return a string. So we're going to return the name of the page that we want to display. So this will be called the login form.html. Now this doesn't exist yet, so keep this name in mind. We're going to have to match this so that way it will actually display the form. Finally, we need to add something to our form. We're going to expect a login model, so we will do a model.add attribute. And this attribute, we'll call it login model, and we're going to provide it with a new instance of the actual class login model. So login model in string is the first part of the parameter. The actual object is the second part of the parameter. Okay, double check to make sure that you got everything that looks like this on the screen. Then we're ready to go ahead and create a login form.html so that way we'll have something to go to. So in the template area, I'm going to do a right click and choose new. Now you can just create a file and name it with an HTML extension. I think there's another item that we can install here that is a HTML starter pack. So let's go to other, search for the HTML item, and then go ahead and choose finish or next. Now I don't know if I had to install some kind of a plugin to make this actually occur or not. So if you don't see this starter page, you can go ahead and just create a file, and then you can put all the HTML code in just as you see it on the screen. So the new file is not really the name that I want, so let's go ahead and rename this now. So let's go to the refactor and choose rename, and let's call this thing login form. Now let's see if this actually prints anything. So we go inside the body and let's create something like login form as a paragraph or some kind of a header. But we need some text on the screen so that way we can test it out. So now we have a controller that is supposed to display this form. Let's go ahead and run the application. So right click on the project title and let's try run as a Spring Boot app. So I watch the console down at the bottom and I don't see any errors, so it looks like I'm time to go to my browser. So bring up a browser page and let's go to localhost and we're doing 8080. This doesn't have anything because our request mapping is not set to anything on the root. So let's do a slash and then login and another slash, and this time we get the message login form. So we know the login form is actually being displayed. Now let's go and make this have some fields like a username and a password entry. Now for this example of creating a login form, I'm just going to borrow one from the Bootstrap web page. So I go to getbootstrap.com and let's go to docs, and I think I can find something under forms here. So I choose general overview and I come down and I see something that looks pretty good. I've got an email address and a password and a submit button with a checkbox. Mostly what I need and a little bit extra. So let's go ahead and copy this. Now I'm going back to my code editor and paste it. So let's come back into here, and where the login form was, let's erase the part that's inside the body and paste our new form. So now we have ourselves a login form that we can modify. So the first part of the form is asking for an email address. Well, that's pretty close. We want to change everything here that says email address to the words username. So let's change the label for it. Let's change the text for it from email address to username. Let's see, is there anything else here? It looks like the ID needs to be changed. The description of the body looks like it needs to be changed. A bunch of stuff. So everything that has to do with the sample or the email address, we're changing to username. Now for the second entry, we're changing everything to password. So the label for should be equal password. That's the name of something. Let's go down to the type. Now actually, funny, I'm going to just leave it as text so that way we can check to see what's inside of our form. We're going to change this back to password later, but for now, let's leave it as plain text so everyone can see what we're typing. The ID also, let's change to password. Let's delete the checkbox. So there's about 4 lines here that don't need to be there, so just highlight them and delete them. And then for the submit button at the bottom, let's change that to a word that says login. It's still a submit button, but we're naming it login. Okay, I'm going to press Control S to save it and then switch over to the browser and let's see what it looks like. So I could go ahead and refresh the page, and sure enough, we got ourselves a login form. Now, the Bootstrap formatting is obviously not taking effect, so we need to install something and that'll work. So let's go and get some Bootstrap files to download. So let's go to the page that we were looking at earlier and click the download button. Let's go to the package here called compiled CSS and JS. I'm choosing download again, and you should see something download. So let me bring over my other folder where the downloads are, and let's see what's inside. So sure enough, there's a folder here called Bootstrap, and I got JS and CSS, exactly what I need. So let's do some rearranging here so I can get these two together. So let's go and bring up the other application, and then we've got ourselves both windows in the same place. So I want to take the 2 folders, JS and CSS, select them both using the Shift key. Now I'm going to drag them over to the static area. And then it says, how would you like to handle this? Let's go ahead and copy them. And let's see what we got. So inside of static, we have CSS, and we certainly do have Bootstrap. And we have a bunch of different versions of it. And I think there should be a Bootstrap Min, which is probably the preferred version. All right, so now we have the CSS resources in place. Let's go ahead and put a link to it on our page. So the link is going to be a link with an href. And inside the quotation marks, we're going to put in the link to this file. And don't forget, we have a rel as the type of link we have. It's a style sheet. So make sure that's all spelled. Then for the pathway to get to Bootstrap, we put a slash, then the folder name, CSS, a slash, and then you can choose one of the 2 different bootstraps here. You could just do bootstrap.css, or if you want to load the minimized version, put in the word min in front of there. So bootstrap.min.css. So I come back to the other page and refresh it, and you can see now that we have Bootstrap running. So if I go and check the inspections and look on the network, I should see that there is now a CSS page being loaded. So if I see in here Bootstrap min CSS, that is now one of the files that is loaded on this page. So looks like it's working properly. So just a quick test. Let's pretend that I didn't spell this correctly, or if I had the wrong path. Let's say, for instance, I forgot to put in CSS with a slash in front of it. Let's save that, come back to the page and refresh. Let's see what happens. We should see that, first of all, the font is lost. Over in the network tab, if you choose that, you can see that we have red for CSS on this, and it says there's a 404 error, means that it didn't get found. It wasn't in the right location. So I'm going to put that slash back in because I want that there. Next, I want to be able to respond to this form when it's submitted. So we're going to have to change some actions here. Up at the top, where the form tag begins, we put in the regular JavaScript action. So that's going to be a quotation marks, and I'll come back here and put in a pound sign in a minute. So then the method name is post. So most actions are post when you submit a form. And then we're going to have a time leaf action here. So this kind of overrules the regular JavaScript action. So we put in th and a colon and then the word action. So inside of the quotation marks, we're going to put an @ symbol and then the method name that we're going to have to generate. So it doesn't exist yet in the controller, but it's going to be called this, process login. Then we're going to have some data that goes with it, which is going to be defined as a th::object. And we're going to be sending back a login model. So all of this here, including the pound sign, let's put that in, is going to have to be the form's actions. So I come back to look at my page here, and something on form is incorrect. What did I do wrong? Can you spot the error? I made this on purpose, didn't I? That way you can see that you have to close things. So I have a quotation mark missing. So after the action, I have a quotation, and then we start with an object. Now up at the top of the form, we have this th::object, which is referring to the login model. Now we're going to get the properties of the model to correspond to each one of the inputs. So inside of the input for the username, let's put a th:\field, and then we're going to say that equals to star, and then curly brackets. So the star is referring to a property that is kind of a sub category of the object. So we could list it as $.loginform.username, but we're going to use star because of the object command that was listed higher up at the form definition, at the root of the form. So these two go together. The login model is the object, and then the star username tells us it's the property of the login model. Now the other input field that we have on this form is for the password. So let's copy and paste our th field, and let's put that down inside of the input bracket. So this property is the object's password. So loginModel.password is what we're referring to here. So once again, the star tells us that this is a property of the object referenced up higher. Now we still haven't gotten to the main point of this lesson, which is to do form validation. We're still just trying to associate a form with a login model, which so far is working. Let's see if this actually can do something with a login model. So let's make all this happen back in the controller. So to save some typing, I'm going to copy and paste the original controller method. And let's go ahead and rename this using a post mapping. So the post mapping, of course, is because the post is the method that's on our form. Then we're going to ask it to say, respond to a post mapping at the URL of process login. Once more, this is something that we referenced on the HTML code just a moment ago. Now we have to rename this method. So instead of display login form, let's call it process login. Now in the attributes, we're going to send a login model along with another result form here. Where do we get the login model though? This time, instead of creating a new one from scratch, we're going to accept it as a parameter from the form. So let's put in a parameter up here on process login. So it'll be of type login model, and a good name for it is login model. So we'll send this along to the next page that's going to be displaying results. Finally, we need to rename the return string. So the return string shows us the name of the next page, and a good name for the next page is loginresults.html. That doesn't exist yet, so we got to create that so something will show up when we click login. Now I don't like to type a lot, so I'm going to just take a copy of the login form. So I'm going to copy it and then paste it in the same folder. And for the name of the file, we have to use the word loginresults.html. So let's go look at the login results now and start modifying it. So just so that I'm not confusing myself, I'm closing login form and going just to login results. Now I don't need any kind of form on this page here. So let's just clear it off and keep only the CSS reference. So instead of creating a form, let's just put some information out to the screen to repeat what the user entered for the username and password. That'll be kind of a confirmation message. So let's create a div. And Bootstrap uses the class name container to make things look kind of formatted in a nice block. Now for a paragraph, I'm going to say username and a colon, and then another paragraph to say username and password. Now it would be nice to actually echo these things, so let's include our model now. Now I'm going to put in a reference in the div, and I'm going to tell it that this is going to expect an object. So this comes from the model. So the login model is the item that was sent to this page. Now I'm going to then put in a reference to the properties of that model inside of each of these paragraphs. So I want something that's in line, which is in this case a span tag. So span is it creates its own div essentially, but does not create a brand new line break. So the text for this span is going to be the star username. So once again, we use star to refer to the object above, which is from login model. So this really means loginModel.username. And then we'll copy and paste because obviously we want to show the next property too, which is the password. Obviously not a secure way to log in, but we're just testing to see if we can get data from a form. So we've got ourselves a response form now from our login process. So let's save this and let's try it again. So I'm going to refresh the page, and this time we've got ourselves a form. It says username, and we've got ourselves a password. And we get the results. So the results are sent back to the controller and then shown on the screen in the login results. Now I want to dress this up a little bit, so I want to do some indenting. So we'll put a div to begin and a div close at the end of the form. Now I'm going to use a container class, and also I'm going to use a second class, which is M, which is about spacing. And if I choose MY, that tells me that it's the spacing above and below, and I can put in a range from 0 to 5. And so 5 is the maximum amount of space. So this will basically put in a margin at the top and a margin at the bottom of the form. Let's go back and see if this works. I'm going to refresh the page, and sure enough, it looks a little bit better. Now in the next part, we're going to actually try to do some data validation. So if I put in a blank here and push login, I will get a message that says you have to enter something, and I'll put in a minimum character link. So right now it tells us you can put in blanks, you can put in long passwords or short passwords, doesn't matter. So what we're going to do next is data validation on a form. So in order to put data validation into a form, we have to add a new dependency. So I'm going to Google and searching for the MVN repository page, which is the Maven master page for everything. And then inside of there, I'm going to put in validation. And let's see what comes up. So the first thing that I'm going to choose is called Spring Boot Starter Validation. And let's go ahead and choose the most current version here. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm not on Gradle, but on the Maven page. Click somewhere inside of this item, and you notice it says at the bottom, it's been copied to the clipboard. So let's get back into the editing, and I'm going to the POM file. So POM XML is at the bottom of the page, and let's go find the area where the dependencies are, and go ahead and paste this section in. So I'm going to indent, and it looks about like that. So when I push save, I'm going to have the entire page update, and you get a little bit of a message down here that says, are you sure you want to make this exact version number? There might be a more current version that's available, or it might change in the future. So it's kind of optional if you want to put the version number in or not. So I'm going to leave it there for now. So you can see the whole thing recompiles automatically because I'm using the development tools. Now I've got another dependency that I want to add. So let's swipe back into here. Now the other validation that I'm going to need is the bean validation. So let's click here and pick the most current one. So I'm not sure exactly which one the most is, so let's click the final at the top. And let's go ahead and click inside of this square. Notice it says it's been copied automatically. And let's switch back into the dependencies and go ahead and paste it into there and indent, and then finally save it. So the bean validation is going to be used on the class that we have in our project, our model, and then this framework here is going to be used in the actual code so we can display error messages that come up on the screen. So these two dependencies work very well together. So the first thing we need to do is define what we mean by the validation and define what is a valid entry. So let's go switch into the models folder and find the login model. So we're going to modify the items at the top of the page. So the username and the password properties now can be restricted with a few annotations. So the first property I want to enforce a validation rule is that we can't have these be blank. So we'll put @not null, and we'll do that for both the username and the password. Now let's go ahead and choose the suggested import for when we type this. So you notice it comes from javax.validation constraints, not null. That's what's up here at the top. So just for curiosity, I bet that validation javax, we're actually the source of this. So if I look here, sure enough, in the dependency, I just added javax validation. So looks to me like I just utilized my package. Now I'm going to add a size restriction. So we'll put in the word size. The size is really the length of the string. So it's going to be a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 15. Now, to let the user know what's going on, we should offer them a message. So let's say message equals, and then you can put in some string here. It doesn't have to be the one I put, but it has to indicate what went wrong if the user entered a form incorrectly. So I'm going to say the username must be between 3 and 15 characters. Now for not null, we can do a message as well. So I'm going to say message equals, and let's say username is required. So if not null is triggered, then this message will show up. If they put in a 2-character username, then the second message will show up. Now let's make the password have some restrictions as well. So let's make this a minimum of 8 characters. We don't want short passwords, they're not very secure. And let's leave it as a maximum of 15 again. So we're just going to adjust slightly the different of the minimum. Now let's change the message as well. So password must be between 8 and 15 characters. So this is the rules. Now we need to go and code the controller and the form to be able to respond when these rules are broken. So the first thing I want to do in the controller then is to put in a new annotation before the parameter called login model. So we'll just say @valid. So if it's invalid, there'll be an event that we can trigger. Now to get hold of that thing, we need to have another parameter. It's called binding result. So binding result is going to take whatever was put into the form, and then it will send this parameter to the controller, so we can tell if there has been an error or not in the validation. Next, I'm going to check to see if there were any errors with the login form. So to do that, we use binding result. So I'm going to say if binding result dot, and there's a method in here called has errors. So if either one of those fields is not entered correctly, this will resolve to a true statement. It has errors. So if we have an error, let's add the login model back into the model, so that way we can send it back to the form again. And let's now return not to the results page, but now let's go back to the login model page so we can try again. So now the login form needs to be updated so that way it can show a message if it detects that there has been a login error. So now in the form itself, we're going to put in a paragraph that will show an error, that will show the actual error message. So we're going to put in a couple of classes here from Bootstrap. So the paragraph will have an alert and alert danger. So this is basically telling it we want this text to be read. That's optional if you want to show it read or not. What is not optional though is the next statement, which is th:\if. So we're going to ask if, and we're going to look at a strange syntax here. So the $sign means, of course, we're doing something with an object that's sent to us. But we're going to ask $fields.hasErrors, and then the field name, this only field name we're interested in, is of the username. So then the last item is th:\errors equals, and then we're going to check to see which property is being checked for. So the property is the username again. So we've got ourselves just this paragraph that should show up only if there is a validation problem. Now we want to do the same thing for the password. So pretty much copy and paste and then change a few details. So for the field name, we're going to have, instead of username, of course, we're going to switch it to password. And then the errors are going to be triggered only on the event if it has a property issue with password. And then the text itself, I don't think is relevant. We can just leave this. It's probably just default text. But anyway, password error will show up next. So this should now show the validation rules. I'm going to save this and relaunch the app. So let's come back into the web page. Let's get over to our browser and let's refresh the form. And let's start by just leaving it empty and choose login. Okay, so the app does show a validation error now. So username must be between 3 and 15. So let's put an ASDF in here. So that's 4 letters, right? And choose login. So only the second one shows up now. And let's put in a long password and see if that's good. And it does take it this time. So we validated that this is correct. Just one more check. I'm going to put in a short username and a valid password and try login. And this time the error shows up only on the first item. So validation is done on several levels here. You can see that first of all, we have to install the dependency. And once we do, we can add these different properties to our class properties. So we have not null and size here. The second part of the validation occurs in the login controller. We had to add a few things such as the valid annotation, and then we also had to add binding results to check to see if those binding results had any errors in them. Finally, we went into the form itself, the login form, and we had to add this line here, which is about whatever we like to display to the user if we detect a problem. If you find this tutorial interesting, then make sure that you follow up with the other items that are in this course. We're developing Spring Boot apps. The rest of the index looks like this for the course. So we're right now on part 3. If any of this other stuff looks interesting to you, make sure you subscribe so you come back and finish up your mini degree. So if you're done here, you'll become a professional web developer in Java. See you soon.